Welcome to a new episode of the Ab Astra podcast. Today we have with us Professor Godefroid Callataÿ, who is a professor of Arabic and Islamic studies at the University of Louvain in Belgium. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're glad to have you with us. So thank you, Professor, for participating, and please let us know a little bit about your research and your work in Arabic studies and its connection to astrology.
Yes, of course. I would say that the focus of my research is Arabic philosophy and history of science in the Middle Ages, and with a very special focus on the thought of the Patron of Purity, or the Ikhwan al-Safa, which I think will be the main focus also of this podcast. Currently, I'm leading an ERC project on the emergence of philosophy and rational thinking in Al-Andalus, with a special focus on the 10th century and on ill-defined channels, well, it's a quite ambitious project. It started in 2017. We're still 2 years left, and we have a team of postdocs working at the University of Louvain, but also at the Warburg Institute. The Warburg Institute is the place where I wrote my PhD quite a long time ago about the great year doctrine, or the Annus Platonicus. If you want, I can say a few words about that.
Yes, please.
Speak about that. So the idea of the great year doctrine, the theory, is, well, it's at the beginning, it's really a mathematical, astronomical, and philosophical problem. The first genuine source is Plato in the Timaeus, and the idea is this: it's the idea of defining the greatest cycle of the universe. And according to Plato's definition, the great year is defined as the period required for all the planets, so the 7 planets, and the sphere of the fixed stars, to come back into conjunction, so that you can have some kind of alignment of the planets. But Plato doesn't tell very explicitly how much you can find the period. But I think it's still possible, from various hints, indications in Plato's work, to determine the periodicity of this. Well, the idea for my PhD, which I did under the supervision of Charles Burnett, of course, was to trace this concept from Plato up to the Renaissance. So you have a lot of people writing very interesting things about this very concept. After Plato, you have Aristotle, Cicero, Seneca in antiquity, many people from Neoplatonists of antiquity. And then, of course, I studied also the thing in Arabic sources, and then the so-called return of the concept to the Western Latin Middle Ages. And it's very interesting to see how the original concept was distorted in various directions, made and so that it was almost unrecognizable by the end. And it's very interesting to study how all these things evolve in time, in Greek, Latin, and Arabic sources.
Yes.
It is a concept. It's mainly mathematical, as you said, and philosophical, but also...
Well, if you read Plato, you will. It's really a metaphysical concept. It's closely related to the emanationist theory, the world soul, which Plato described at length in the Timaeus. So it's not only a mathematical concept.
Yes, no, not only mathematics, but when this cycle is completed, if it is, it would be extremely long cycle. What happens? What is the consequence of this?
Well, Plato doesn't say anything about that. But the thing is that afterwards, there were people who had a very rigid conception of the cycle, and they postulated that the cycle will come back again and again, the same. This is also the reason why, for example, in antiquity and then later on in the Middle Ages, you have Christian thinkers who, of course, were a strong opponent to the cycle, because it's, of course, totally incompatible with the Christian doctrine. Augustine, for example, in antiquity, and then you have also people then later on in the Middle Ages. Nicole Oren is someone who decided to attack the concept by saying, well, I will combat, I will fight the mathematicians with mathematical tools, and argue that on the basis of the incommensurability of the planets, the great year was something impossible. Well, anyway, the great year doctrine still survived until a bit later, until the Renaissance, let's say, about the time of the Copernican revolution.
It's
very interesting too.
Yes.
It is, and so they decided the cycle would be completed when the planets would return to their original position. And this original position, is it related to what they call the Thema Mundi, the position?
Well, for some of them, it was like that. But you have, for example, all the people. It was assumed that all the planets at the very beginning started with the first degree of the zodiac, so Aries. Aries.
Oh, I see. Yes. It is
for example, and you find the same conception in India. Indian astronomers had the same theory, and in their cases, it was, of course, very enormous cycle, enormous periods. But the basic fact, or the center of the theory, was this idea that all the planets were aligned at the very beginning of the universe, and from time to time. And the last conjunctions, which were supposed to coincide with a big flood, was always supposed to be in, if I remember well, the year 3101 before Christ. Very precise. They also indicated the hour and the day.
I was going to ask you that.
Very specific. Yeah, that is a very interesting, and yes, that is one of the ideas of the beginning of the universe. Everything at the 0 degrees Aries. And this somehow interfaces with another idea. The Thema Mundi would be the planets when God or Ahura Mazda, or when the divinity, when the Creator created the planets, they would be in their best possible position, which would be either their domicile or their exaltation. There are two versions. It's a slightly different idea, but it's the same concept. The idea that the planets tend to return to their ideal position, or to the beginning of Aries in this case.
Yes, and then we see that a lot in Arabic astrology, Arabic revolutions of the world, in which they're always not exactly such a large period, because it's impossible to work with it, but they do count continuously several periods and sub-periods that are occurring and explain.
What I found very interesting in this research was also the confusions that were made in time between various cycles, because you have this definition of the greatest cycle of the universe as the time required for all the planets to come back into conjunction. And according to some Indian astronomers, and this was later transmitted to the Arabs, the period is for this conjunction is supposed to be 360,000 years. Okay, but we find in sources confusions with the equinoctial precession.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Ptolemy's value, which is 36,000 years. Mm-hmm. We find that in manuscript there are confusions, for example. Mm-hmm. Then, obviously, there was a confusion between these two cycles of the universe, which are both supposed to be the greatest cycle of the universe, but which have nothing to do in reality.
They are completely.
On the one side, you have a complete conjunction of the spheres, and then you have the equinoctial precession, which is not that.
It's another thing, yes.
Yeah. And I was regarding the equinoctial precession. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but have you seen any references in your work with these eras of the so-called the eras of the signs? So the Aquarius era, the Pisces era, which is something quite common from the late 19th century.
No.
Have you seen any evidence?
No, I didn't come across this kind of.
We haven't seen either, and it's something that is very contemporary, and people claim it's old, but it's actually not.
There is this mythology of antiquity in this concept, but the concept appears to be quite modern in its source.
Just
it's fake.
Yes, exactly. One more question just before we move to another topic, because I'm very curious. This might be completely out of topic, but are there any parallels between this concept, the Platonic here, and the Stoic concept of the Great Conflagration? Because it will be by fire also.
Sure. In Seneca is an author who writes just that.
Okay.
So, yes. So he took up the idea of the great year, but of course he adapted it to what you say here, the theory with flood and conflagration occurring. I don't know. He says when the planets are all back, but then in that case it's not Aries, it's Capricorn and the opposite sign.
And Cancer, yes.
And Cancer,
and Cancer, yeah. Right. I don't remember. I think it's Cancer is the flood, and Capricorn is the major conflagration, or the other way around. I'm very sorry, but I'm
probably Cancer is the flood because it's a
my
water.
Was 25 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. I would go for the flood in Cancer because the water sign.
Sure.
I'm not sure.
Definitely.
I think it could be the opposite.
You think?
I think so. I think I saw reference.
Just to survive.
Yes, because it's a summer. It's the summer solstice.
It's very easy to check.
There is no flood.
But that's easy. Yeah, that's easy to check.
It's very easy to check.
You will soon find out when the planets all gone.
I can't show here you a copy of my book on the great year. As a result of the confinement, I had no access to my office until very recently. So,
well, but we will put a link to.
Sure.
And it is very interesting.
So someone who wants to.
Platonicus, because really Plato was the locus classicus of it, and even in medieval times, it was sometimes referred to as Annus Platonicus.
What is the collection of the book? The editor of the book, please.
It's Peter's.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because we will try to find it.
Yes, we will put the link. Yes.
It seems to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, would you like to talk about the Patron of Purity?
Yes, of course.
There's been research that.
What would you like to know about the Patron of Purity?
Everything. First of all, we need to just to explain. It was a group of wise men anonymous, apparently anonymous, and the letters they wrote. Just a context, and then we can talk a little bit about astrology.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's true that I'm a bit fascinated by the thought of the Brethren of Purity. I really don't know why, or maybe I can't explain why. I don't know. But it's a long story. At the very beginning, I think I was very interested in the fact that the work is a wonderful encyclopedia. That's and also. So, and I was very much interested in the thing of classification of signs, and so that's perhaps was the reason why I started reading them. So basically, it's true that so the Ikhwan Safa in Arabic, the Brethren of Purity, are a very mysterious group of people, and what we have is a collection of treatises in the form of epistles. About 50 epistles concerned with various things, various topics, various sciences, and arranged in manuscripts in groups. So it's very like an encyclopedia. You have a group of mathematical treatises dealing with mathematical science and logic. You have a group with natural sciences, physics, and then you have a group of epistles concerned with what they call the science of the soul and the intellect, and then you have finally a group of treatises dealing with divine sciences. So in addition to being an encyclopedia, it's also really initiative. So you have a kind of initiation. And the thing is that the authors, and we don't know anything about these authors because they did their utmost not to reveal their identities, and they write, so they say, we are the Brethren of Purity, and they address a fictitious reader who is also considered to be part of the Brotherhood, so they say, and every chapter and every paragraph of this, it's about 2,000 pages. Every paragraph begins with, you should know, my friend, that. It can be a bit boring at the because it's a bit repetitive, this this phrase, but it's not boring at all. I was very interested in this enormous contrast between this very mysterious people. We don't know anything about them. We don't know anything about the time of composition. We don't know, and we have, but at the same time we have a very tangible purpose, which had a big readership, a major readership. It's very easy to see that the epistles of the Brethren of Purity were very influential in time, and that the influence spread over even more than Islam. Even you have two or three epistles were even translated into Latin, but only 2 or 3. We don't have more about, well, so far we haven't found more than that.
Which topics were translated, just out of curiosity?
Well, there's the epistle on geography. And we have one manuscript in Palermo with what appears to be a quite literal Latin translation. But it's an isolated case, I would say. And then we have one epistle on logic, which was also translated, but not. It appears that the overall encyclopedia was not translated. What's very interesting about the Ikhwan Safa is that yes, the Rasail Ikhwan Safa, the epistle of the Brethren of Purity, can really be defined as an encyclopedia. It fulfills all the criteria to be considered as an encyclopedia. So it's rather long, it's very systematic, It uses a lot of authorities, sources, and so on. Everything. So it really deserves to be called an encyclopedia, and it's perhaps the first genuine encyclopedia in the Islamic world. But at the same time, because we often say, well, we have often this idea that encyclopedias worked with second-hand statements, and were not very original. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's the case with the Ikhwan al-Safa, because they were clearly original. They were original because they were very much interested, of course, in topics like astrology, magic, alchemy, all these esoteric sciences. And they clearly had a kind of, well, esoteric agenda. So when they quote from a source, an ancient source, they always do it with something in their mind to adapt them to what they think to be the philosophy. And it's of course very complicated to define the doctrinal affiliation of the Ikhwan al-Safa. Mm-hmm. So there were scholars who said they were Mu'tazili, there were scholars who said they were Sunni, and so on. Well, very probably, well, no. I would say definitely they were Shiite philosophers, and they were very well, and the affiliation. They have many things to share with the Ismaili doctrine. Well, it's a fascinating thing. And even in one case, I would say, because people say, well, encyclopedias are not original. In one case, they are very clearly original. And I wrote an article about that. The idea was that the first, I have to say that the first discovery was not mine, but it was proposed by a French geologist, and it's about geology. You find in one of the epistles, the epistle on minerals, a description of the various phenomena at work on the Earth's surface, trying to find a global, a comprehensive theory involving, explicating the secular erosion, the layers in the sediments of the sea, and the uplifting of these layers. It's very original, mm-hmm. and it antedates modern science in a very, very, very striking way. So it's a French geologist who was the first to. He wrote a book of introduction to geology, and he devoted one chapter to the Ikhwan al-Safa. He didn't know Arabic, but he was he asked a colleague to translate the Ikhwan al-Safa for him, and he really realized that they were very innovative in geological science, mm-hmm. Right? Very, very interesting.
Yes.
Is that according to them, they relate these periods, geological periods, to the period of equinoctial precession. So they take it, the 36,000 year cycle, with Ptolemy's value, mm-hmm. as the big period. And they combine that with discoveries made in antiquities, theories by Aristotle, for example, in the Meteorologica, about the interchange between seas and mainlands. Mm. Antiquity, well, there were many people already who had wondered about the fact that we find fossils very, very far away from the sea. Mm-hmm. The idea that there were interchanges between mainlands and seas was already present, and it was theorized even by Aristotle. And the Ikhwan al-Safa take this as a kind of framework, but then they have this very, very innovative description of the geological phenomena. Very impressed.
Very scientific. It's very interesting. They were already
Yes, yes,
trying
sure.
to get the global idea of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
all the movement on Earth.
Yeah, I remember that this French scholar, geologist, professional geologist, who is François Elan-Berger, even said that they really anticipated Hutton, but that's really the 17th century, or
Yes.
that you can't find anything more innovative and more scientific, so to speak, before the time, except for the Honosafa. They were not just imitators.
No.
Exactly.
They were definitely original.
They were scientists.
Yes.
They were not only collecting.
Yes, well, it depends.
Also
If you browse through the old corpus, you realize that they were quite good, well, decent astronomers, astrologers, but you will not see anything about medicine, for example. If we have to assume that they would form a group, as they say, because they, yes, the Brethren of Purity, we have to perhaps, well, think of a group where you have at least one or two people very good at astronomy or relatively good at astronomy, astrology, Ilm al-Nujum, the science of the stars, as we say in Arabic. But there are other sciences a little bit less.
they were probably in. This is just an idea. Probably they were more interested in the general knowledge, like the knowledge of the stars and the knowledge of Earth, than the personal.
They were philosophers. So important for them is to theorize about all this, like to articulate sciences into and coherent.
Philosophers, really, in the etymological sense, they would love knowledge, science. So they were interested in knowledge, all sorts of knowledge, because now we separate knowledge in several categories. But they would probably
really, yes, and when I will perhaps just show you, because I wrote a book on the Honosafa as part of the Makers of the Muslim World collection series, which is this book here, and the idea really was to insist on the coherence of the program, followed by the authors. That's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Yes, yes.
One of the things I noticed when you were describing the theory of geology, again, astrology was there as an explanation.
Yeah, sure.
Because this is so interesting. Astrology, some people think astrology is just something separated that people did, horoscope. But astrology would be like the basis of an explanation for cycles or the universe or whatever. So in this case, it would be the explanation of the geological cycles.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Very
interesting. Sure. And then they, of course, they were very interested in the science of the stars. There are at least 3 epistles dealing with that. One in the first part, which is really, it is called Phi Astronomia, so on astronomy, and they use the Greek word translated in Arabic to do it, with the basic notions of astronomy and astrology, of course, because you can't really separate. And then you have in the second part, in the section of natural sciences, another epistle on the heavens and the world. And it's more or less the same thing, but taking a more Aristotelian approach. And then, of course, and that was really my focus here in my research, you have an epistle entirely dedicated to the cycles and revolutions, where they describe all the astronomical and astrological cycles, where they refer to the great year, but with the Indian value. So that's very interesting. With these 3, 360,000 years. And they describe also the equinoctial precession.
Mm-hmm.
And then they attach great importance, they were not the only ones to do that, to the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn.
Yes.
So that is doctrine which Arab astrologers and astronomers inherited from Sassanid Persia.
Mm-hmm.
And so why Saturn and Jupiter? I really don't know why. Maybe there are people who can explain that, but they attach great importance, in particular, to these two planets. And the thing is that, well, Jupiter takes about 12 years to accomplish one revolution. Saturn about 30 years. So the question is, once again, when do these two planets meet? And in astronomy, well, every 20 years, less, the two planets will meet at a certain point in the zodiac. And this is called the small Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And then you have another one, because there will be a kind of, well, every 20 years, the two planets will meet, but not at the same place. And on an average, the second conjunction will take place 120 degrees apart from the first one, and then all the way through. So it will take 240 years for these two planets to leave, to have to be in conjunction, but not in a sign of the same nature.
Same element, yes.
Right. Okay. There's the theory of the triplicities and the
Yes.
So, for example, the first conjunction will be in the sign of Aries, and then a second one will take place in a sign of the same nature as Aries, and then you will have to wait for 12 conjunctions to quit and to leave from this.
Move to the other element.
From these triangle, and then you will have to wait for 960 years to have these conjunctions back to a sign of the same nature. So, well, it's a bit complicated to explain, but the thing is, astronomers and astrologers attach great importance to that. And in the case of the Juan Safa, they made coincide the small Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions of every 20 years to a change in well, the replacement of a king or a caliph on the royal throne. Every 240 years, they will make correspond that middle conjunction to a change of dynasty. And the very important thing is every 960 years, because they will make coincide this with a change in religion. And this is very interesting because they adapt and they combine this with something that you can find in Ismaili doctrine. So it's a doctrine of prophetic history. You have cycles of 7,000 years, each divided in periods of 1,000 years, and each millennium is said to be heralded by a prophet. And according to that views, you have Adam, of course, and then Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and then Muhammad, who is to be the prophet of the 6th millennium, the 6th, but not the 7th. Because we are waiting, and we are supposed to be in this 6th millennium, but there we're waiting for another conjunction to come back, well, to come, which will herald the 7th millennium. It's very interesting in terms of eschatology. And it also clearly posits the Ikhwan as Shiite authors.
And they would they associate certain traits to each prophet according to
Sure.
to the sign where the conjunction occurs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and for in one particular epistle dealing with resurrection, they even take up and adapt the very famous Quranic story of the sleepers of the cave. They assimilate themselves to the sleepers because that's the message, which is esoteric. And now, for the time being, it has to be concealed inside a cave. But they announce, and there are hints in various epistles, about a conjunction to appear. But it's very, well, it's not really explicitly stated, as you may assume. Clearly, they announce to the partisans the possibility of a new conjunction to appear, and which will coincide with the 7th millennium. So it's very interesting.
So the new prophet, the last prophet.
Yes, whom they call the Qa'im, which means the man who will rise up, the Qa'im of resurrection.
Is there any correlation?
A Messiah.
Is there any correlation between this? Well, the Messiah of the Jewish religion, and also the Mahdi, the one that is the one that is covered and not revealed. Is it any kind of correlation between this?
Between this and what?
Between this 7th prophet, the one that they are expecting, and all these other Messiah. So
sure. Well, the idea is the same.
It is always yes.
No, sure.
So they tend to assimilate one to the other eventually.
They will not say that, but
they will not say that.
Heard that.
That's a conclusion that we reach due to the similarities.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And do they have, besides the study of the cycle, do they have a more practical approach to astrology? How do they handle it? They have this description of cycles. They have the principles, but do they have any application rules, anything that resembles a practical?
No, well, in this epistle on revolutions and cycles, it's divided in 2 parts. The first part is rather short, which is a list of cycles, revolutions, and conjunctions. And then the second part is the implications of these cycles on the world of generation and corruption.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no hint of what we would call personal astrology for people. It's more like a collective approach.
Well, in fact, I'm more interested in the collective historical astrology. And now the thing is that the very, very last epistle is about magic. And in that case, it's a very long epistle. In that case, it's more personal. It's horoscopic, cathartic, interrogative astrology. The thing is, and this is what I'm now trying to explain in the introduction to the edition of that epistle, which I'm currently doing. I have the strong feeling that this epistle is not by the same authors as the other epistles. Yes. But this allows me perhaps just to mention, because I didn't do that, there is now a huge international project to edit critically all these epistles. So far we had to rely on a not uncritical edition, which was a series of uncritical editions. But now at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, they are coordinating a big project on this. And it's almost done now. Most of the epistles have been edited on the basis of 10 or 15 manuscripts in some cases, with an English translation and various annotations. I can perhaps show you some examples. It's published by Oxford University Press and the Institute for Ismaili Studies. This is, for example, the epistles 6 and 6 to 8. Number 7 is one which I did about the classification of the sciences and that sort of things. So it's a very ambitious, very ambitious project. Yeah.
So it will be available for non-Arabic readers.
It is. That's one of the goals of the undertaking. Yeah, sure.
And do you have a date, the timeline where it will be ready?
We are
Which
already
one?
like
The one about magic?
Yes.
Well,
we
actually,
are
there are-
already trying to,
You piqued our curiosity.
So the one about cycles and revolutions is already done. It has been published a few years ago. It's epistle 36 as part of this volume.
Okay.
I'll show you that. Yeah, epistles 36. Where it is, just a few moments. Here it is.
Okay. We are trying to discreetly write it down.
It was published 2 or 3 years ago, if I remember.
Okay.
No, it is very, very interesting. And one of the things that they normally mention when they write these initiatic texts is they mention the personal horoscope of, like the ideal horoscope. I read in other texts from another author, Razi, I think you're familiar. And he says, if you have this and this and this in your horoscope, then you are very prone to magic or prone to this kind of knowledge. So it also connects with people, but in a way that it's like if someone has certain traits, this person will be adequate for the works of magic. If not so much. So I'm curious if they also have this.
Yes, well, you can find this kind of things in this the long version of Epistle of Magic. The thing is that the problem is now to see if it was written by the same authors as the others. But anyway, the text is there, so there was someone who wrote that.
Yes. Well, it is very interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yes. Well, thank you. And to wrap it up, could you talk a little bit about your current projects? You were mentioning that you're now currently in ERC.
Yes. Well, of course, because it is of course linked to the Patron of Purity. A few years ago, I was on a sabbatical leave in Barcelona and in Spain in general, and I was there to explore the influence of the Juana Safa in Al-Andalus. And at the very beginning, I was not sure I would discover anything, because it was quite mysterious. And I began to realize that they were very important. They're very, very important. But the thing is that since it's not really an orthodox kind of doctrine, rarely you can find people who quote them by saying, I took that from the Juana Safa. So this is what I call ill-defined channel. I began to realize that they were very important and that they were perhaps introduced into Al-Andalus also sooner than people had usually said. And then I began to realize that perhaps not only them, but other corpora from the East were introduced and sharing more or less the same kind of doctrine. So perhaps also the corpus, the Jabirian, so the text by Jabir or ascribed to Jabir. Also a text called the Nabatean Agriculture, very important. All these texts seem to have been introduced to Al-Andalus at about the same time. And this was the beginning of the idea of trying to launching a big project, and I was quite lucky to get it, where we try to study this transmission from text originating in the East to Al-Andalus. trying to find if perhaps philosophy and rational thinking, because all these sciences were considered to be rational, were not there before the time usually assumed. So the idea behind the project.
When you still have 2 more years,
we still have 2 more years,
and it's a very ambitious project. Do you think you can fit?
It is. The thing is that with the COVID crisis, as many people, we have been very severely impacted. So, for example, this year, I was in Princeton on a sabbatical leave to study all this thing as part of the project. And one of the ideas there, one of the plans, was to organize a major conference as part of the ERC project at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And it had to be cancelled. It will be rescheduled, hopefully next year, but I don't know exactly when. Yeah. We shall have other major conference to organize in those 2 forthcoming years.
We will be attentively looking for this.
Yes,
and we will keep in touch, of course.
Yes.
Right.
Well, Professor, thank you very much for.
Thank you to you.
Yes.
It's really a pleasure to have this talk with you.
It was a pleasure and very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can speak on other topics in the
Why
future.
not? Why not? It's definitely a possibility.
So we say goodbye and
say goodbye.
And thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.